Today, we begin our study of the area that many people often think of as the heart of organizational behavior: motivation, why we do what we do. Our text has a quote from Lee Iacocca, which in fact seems to reduce management to simply motivating other people. Is that all that it is? We start out at looking at this very complex process or processes by looking at need theories, and at a later time, next time, proceed to look at some that are somewhat more cognitively based. And then we'll take a look all the way through at applications. But first, let's try to get a grip on what is this complex process of motivation. We feel it. Clearly, we can identify it in ourselves, but defining it might be a little bit more difficult. If we look at the overhead, we can see that if we go back up to, that motivation is the set of processes that arouse, that direct, and maintain behavior towards some very specific goal. So we're not just energized, we're energized to do something very specific when we feel motivated. We can think of arousal as the level of effort that we're putting in, or the energy that gets us moving, that gets us started. We can think of direction as some goal orientation. We're energized, but we're energized to achieve some goal. And the third facet that's important in all of this is maintenance, because motivated behavior usually will persist until the goal is achieved. At the simplest, at the very simplest level, if you're really hungry, you're not going to stop until you get some food. If you're really thirsty, you're not going to stop until you get some water. And if you're in pain, you're going to do everything you can to get yourself out of that painful situation. Okay, so you keep moving, keep acting until you achieve the goal. Let's dissect this a bit more in an example. Suppose, and that should really, in terms of the arousal part, read desire to make a good impression. Couldn't quite fit it in the oval on that one. But suppose you have this desire to make a good impression. It's particularly the case when you're new in the work situation. You want people to think well of you, so you're motivated along those lines. How are you going to do that? You're energized, you're activated to make a good impression. You have alternate ways of doing it, and you may put your effort more into one path than another path. You have different behaviors you can choose from. You could spend time complimenting the work of your boss or your coworkers, or you could spend time staying late. Of course, you have to make sure that somebody knows you stay late. What's the point of it? Okay, and putting in work that way. Or you could spend time doing favors for somebody. All of these are different paths that you can take, but they're all goal-directed, and you might, in fact, do all of them, okay, as opposed to simply one. And the maintenance part is that you persist. You persist until you get some knowledge, some feedback somewhere along the line that you have achieved your goal, that you've made a good impression on people. You may look for little indicators of that in terms of getting the feedback. Are people inviting you to go out to lunch with them? Are people, in fact, saying, they're happy to have you on board? Any of these little signals that may indicate it, but the behavior keeps up persists until you've achieved the goal, but that's a goal you have to keep on achieving, and we'll see that complicated aspect of motivation as we talk about it. Some more basics on motivation before we get into actual discussion of need theories. Motivation is multifaceted. What that means is that any single behavior you engage in can have multiple motivations propelling it. You're sitting here in the classroom. You're sitting here in the classroom because you registered for the course, because you have another class after this, so you might as well get here for this class, because it's a required course, because you want to do well, and maybe you just like the material that's being covered. Who knows? Any of those reasons, and all of those reasons, can account for your presence in the classroom. You all have the same behavior. And if we were to go around and I were to ask you, we'd get a lot of different reasons as well. Everybody here with the same behavior. Okay? So the other aspect of it is that different people have different motivations for doing things. Same behavior can reflect different motivations. It can reflect multiple motivations, and it can reflect different motivations. So its behavior is complex in that way. Another example, being cooperative in the workplace. Why are people cooperative? Well, they're cooperative in part because they may want other people to think well of them, a reason for doing it, because perhaps their compensation is based on team effort. They want the money, another reason for doing it. So we look at these complex kinds of things. Perhaps people just on their own enjoy working with other people. 3 reasons, multifaceted. Somebody is closing a sale. Okay? We're looking at this behavior. Again, multiple reasons for doing it. Closing the sale gives somebody a sense of power. Reasons on your own as to why a person might be motivated to close a sale. So that's one aspect of it. But we can look at yet another basic aspect of motivation and beginning to get a feel for its complexity. Performance. Like learning, there is not a one-to-one equivalence between performance and motivation. Very often we like to slip into that trap, that simplistic way of thinking that performance totally reflects motivation. Not the case. There are clearly other things which come into play. One is ability. I could have all the motivation in the world, okay? Put me out on the basketball court, can't do a thing. The ability isn't there. So that's one of the major things. Another major thing that affects performance, besides motivation, okay, and clearly motivation plays a good role in all of this, is opportunity. If the coach has you sitting on the bench, doesn't matter how motivated you are, nobody's ever going to know it. These are 2 important things to take into the workplace for you as a manager. Because if you want your workers to be motivated, you've got to give them the opportunity to perform. Okay? And you also, as you put them into situations, need to make sure that they have the ability. So we don't have the one-to-one correspondence between motivation and ability. If we break this down, it means that on the one hand, people can come into a situation with a high level of motivation, but for some reason their performance falls short of the mark, falls short of their expectations, doesn't seem to reach that level of motivation. Somebody want to give us some example of how this might happen? Patty?
I had an instance where I had to give a presentation, and I was highly motivated. I felt it was a very important message that I wanted to get out. And I practiced. Morning of the presentation, I was ready. I went into the presentation, but I completely blew it. And I believe it was because I took the focus off of what was the initial reason for the presentation and internalized the focus because I wanted to do so well. I was too overly critical of my gestures, my performance, that I completely blew it.
Okay, so we see what happens sometimes is maybe even motivation can interfere with performance. That you are so highly motivated that you're attending to all kinds of things in your behavior and not the main focus of your presentation. You become so self-conscious that you lose focus of the content of the, in this case, the presentation. And I'm sure everybody at some time or other has had to give a presentation, and in the process of doing it becomes extremely aware of their own behaviors. You hear the sound of your own voice. You become concerned with, is your clothing adjusted properly? Does that look right? Is your makeup right? Is your hair combed right? Is your voice trembling? Can anybody notice that you're sweating? And as you focus on all of these things, you become so self-aware in the presentation, you take your focus off what's going on. So in this case, we see interference between the level of motivation and the actual performance. Then we have the other side of things, where we look at somebody and we say, boy, that looks as if somebody's putting in no effort at all. That person makes it look so easy, and I have to work so hard at achieving something. Is it possible that somebody can have a really high level of performance, and from our perspective, there seems to be minimal or no effort? I think sports tend to give us a good example. Does somebody want to think about that? John?
Yeah, I think that to use an example of like Michael Jordan, he works out really hard in the off season. He's motivated that way. He does a lot of practice and probably works harder than anybody, but he also has the ability to play really well. So that it almost looks really easy for him. So that would be an example.
Okay, so here we have somebody who's got an extremely high level of ability, but you mentioned something else in there, that it may not be quite as effortless as some of us would think. Tony, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Do you want to continue?
Sure. I think that you have to look at how motivation expresses itself in preparation, because ostensibly that preparation increases your aptitude. You become better, you become more knowledgeable. So when you see someone in a competitive situation, the challenge is there, but for them it's much reduced because they're so well prepared that they're in essence overqualified, or more than a match for their competition.
Okay, so we've got a really interesting situation going on here, where we talk about, from an outsider's perspective, it looks as if somebody is not putting in much effort, and the performance level is really high. But one of the things that may get a person to that point, as Tony and John have pointed out, is the motivation that makes you prepare to get ready for the situation, so that you walk into a situation and you're now able to use your ability up to its fullest. We're going to come back and talk about this later on, because it's an interesting situation. I talked about ability being a factor in performance, as well as motivation and opportunity. And sometimes we think of ability as being a fixed kind of thing. You're born with the ability, you're not born with the ability. The truth is, we never really know how much ability we have. Can we drive it up to yet another notch and yet another notch? If we practice, if somebody is giving us the right techniques for doing it, and if not only we're given the opportunities, but we make opportunities for ourselves. So performance, motivation, a complex relationship between the two. that as an introduction, and now we look at one of the approaches to understanding motivation. Let me preface our discussion today and to carry over into our discussion over the next couple of sessions that we're going to be looking at different approaches. And no one approach seems to explain all of motivation. At sometimes we can better understand somebody's motives using one of the approaches, perhaps the need approach. At another time, perhaps a more cognitively based approach explains what people are doing. And so from a managerial point of view, you want to be familiar with all of them so that you have all available in your grab bag of managerial tricks and knowledge to help you understand what's going on with workers out there and to even help you spur workers on to better performance. Need theories. The notion with need theories is that somehow we have needs, and when we experience a deficit in the needs, we're spurred to do something about it, to solve it. One of the most popular need theories out there in the literature about motivation in the workplace is that of Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. A little bit about Maslow. Maslow was not a manager. Maslow, in fact, was a clinical psychologist. In his observations of his patients over the years led him to build this theory that essentially worked on the notion that if people's needs go unmet, that they're not going to develop in a healthy path, that there are going to be problems in their development. This notion was carried over into the workplace. And here the idea is that if workers' needs go unmet, they're not going to be able to perform or to contribute to their fullest. What are the needs that Maslow considered, and how did he order them? Well, at the bottom of the need chain is that of physiological needs. These are basic biological drives, and we often think of them in terms of needs for food, for water, for comfortable temperatures, for avoiding pain, for air. Okay, really basic physiological drives. And here the reasoning is quite simple. If you're not fulfilled in terms of these drives, you're going to be compelled to do something about it. And these needs are seen as predominating. That if these very basic needs go unmet, you can't even think about more social needs that you might have. The focus then is on fulfilling these basic physiological needs. Well, from your own experience, think about it. A toothache is very compelling. And when you have it, you can't think about anything else. And when you start to get hungry, much as you'd like to concentrate on something, the lecture that you're at, the meeting that you're at, you keep thinking about, when is this going to be over so I can get to lunch? And so your attention is diverted that way as well. In the workplace, people who don't come in with having had sufficient food, who come in hungry, are going to be thinking about being hungry and not doing work. People who come in who are too sleepy are going to be thinking about, how am I going to take a rest break and not doing work? So these needs have to be met. Maslow also believed that as long as these needs were unmet, you couldn't go up a level in the hierarchy. But once these needs were met, a whole new level of needs would come up, and those needs, the next level up this need chain, would be safety needs. The need to be in a secure environment, one where you don't have to think about, are you going to be at harm or at risk from anything out there in the environment? And again, if your concern is with security, it's hard to focus on anything above that. We need secure places to live. We need secure places to work. And if we're worried about our own personal or our family security in this, then you spend all your time working on protection. And interesting, as we walk around and we see the efforts that are made for people to create secure working environments. And where there are high crime rates in residential areas where people are living, again, the efforts put in to create secure living environments. Alarms, bars on windows, video cameras, passes that you need to get in anywhere, codes that you need to get in. And the more secure the area needs to be, the more extensive and elaborate becomes the protection system, because security is basic to us. We are all quite willing to pass through metal detectors because it helps ensure our security and safety in flying or going into buildings if that's required. So security becomes important. In the workplace, how does this translate? Well, all of the protection devices that I talked about for making it a secure working environment. But beyond that, some jobs are more dangerous than others, and so you need to put in safety equipment for those people to wear to help ensure their safety, to make the job somewhat secure. Policemen, bulletproof vests, as an example, firemen, and all kinds of safety equipment that they have for working in very dangerous environments. That's one example. But the other security that we get concerned with in the workplace has to do with our ability to survive on the job. In most jobs, there is no written guarantee that you're going to survive. The phrase is called employment at will. And what that means is, at will, you get a better job offer and you can leave. And at will, the employer is free to fire you. There is no security. You hope that over the years, as you build up some seniority, that's going to contribute. It will be factored in. But in some situations, there is security. Professors get tenure. And there are work protection clauses, no layoffs, that unions build in. In civil service environments, again, there is usually protection for workers. And finally, there are legal avenues that exist out there if you believe that there was wrongful dismissal. There is legal recourse for you out there. It may be expensive, it may be difficult to prove, but that avenue exists. So security on the job, and you can see that why unions build the protection in for their workers. That's in part what unions are about. It's about giving security to workers. The next level up, assuming that safety needs have been met, are those that are called belongingness needs. These have to do with social needs. Needs to be with other people. Needs to communicate with other people. We are very social animals. We're not hermits. We crave the company of other people and the attention of other people and the ability to communicate and to talk and to socialize with other people. And in large part, for some workers, this may be the primary motivation for going to work, is to be with other people. It's the socialness with coworkers. that gives people satisfaction and gratification in the workplace. Whether it be the small talk and chit-chat that happens with coworkers as you work on a team project or any project, the little bit of office talk, that informal conversation that goes on, or even more goal-directed, bouncing your ideas off somebody and shaping your ideas on goal-related projects that you're working on that have to do with the work that you're doing, or the attempt of offices to create social situations. The office bowling league, bowling team, the office softball team, the office picnic. Or, again, coming back to the informal, just going out to lunch with your coworkers, socializing and being with them. So these are needs that also need to be satisfied among workers. And what we need to do for those workers who have particularly strong needs in this area, but for all workers in general, is to provide some opportunity for them to interact, to be social. We find out one of the things that happens when workers telecommute, work from home, is they begin to miss this ability to engage in office small talk. They feel isolated. They feel lonely. Well, most are not telecommuting on a full-time basis, so that this does not seem to become overwhelming. But where there is more full-time telecommuting, there is also evidence that there is more small talk online, that it's not all goal-directed, that people start chit-chatting online or in telephone conversations with workers to find out what's going on and to stay plugged in into the social network. The fourth layer in this hierarchy, moving up the hierarchy, has to do with esteem needs, our needs for having feelings of achievement, of recognition, of getting noticed in the workplace. And this level emerges only after lower level needs, social needs, safety needs, physiological needs, have been satisfied. People need to have a sense of self-respect. People need to have a sense that they are developing in the workplace, and people look for recognition in the workplace. This is met again in the workplace. We see signs of it all over. Informally, by the attaboys, the pats on the back that we get from our colleagues and our bosses. More formally, we see this happening when there are write-ups about achievements of workers in office newsletters. Or we see this happening in the awards and the trophies that are given out in the workplace. Manager of the month, salesperson of the month, the parking space that's designated for whoever is the employee of the month, or awards of getting trips to Honolulu, Bermuda, or something like that, in recognition of work well done. The Army is one of the best examples that I can think of in terms of giving recognition and meeting esteem needs. In what way do they do this? Bars, stars, stripes. And these are worn on the uniform. They're worn publicly so that people can recognize what this person has achieved. And finally, where do we wind up in this hierarchy? We wind up at the top with self-actualization. Sometimes a difficult concept to grasp. But if I had to phrase it up in a slogan, I'd choose the Army's, "Be all that you can be." It's a sense of reaching your fullest potential, but not quitting. That once you reach it, you want to stay at that level of peak performance and keep achieving and keep developing. That you don't ever let down once you reach this level of self-actualization. Not everybody necessarily gets to this level. And when you're at this level, the behavior is its own reward. You don't need recognition from other people. You know you're there. You know that you've hit your stride when you've hit this level. This is wonderful for the workplace because now you've got people performing at top levels because work almost becomes like play. Nobody tells you to go out and engage in all those activities that you call play. You do it because you love doing it. And it's gratifying for its own need, and you work at being good in those areas. You spend time, you put in the preparation. And this is the same thing with work. It becomes the same way. You do the work because you love doing it, and you feel you've hit your full stride in terms of your level of performance. Collectively, if we take a look at the hierarchy again, the three bottom needs on the hierarchy are known as deficiency needs. You're missing something, you do something to get satisfaction or gratification at that level. The top two needs are known as growth needs. They add to one's potential capabilities and development. Is this really the way we operate? Is this a true model of motivation for us? Well, it's a handy model. Maybe we like the triangle. It helps us encapsulate what motivation is. But in fact, there is not good evidence out there to show that the hierarchy operates in this fashion. And I started before by saying that motivation is multifaceted. This would suggest that it's not multifaceted. It really is multifaceted. And so somebody by the name of Alldorfer has attempted to improve on this with the ERG theory, existence, relatedness, and growth needs. Alldorfer differs from Maslow because there is no assumption that lower level needs have to be met before the higher level emerges. You can have needs operating at different times. You can move up and down that hierarchy. As a matter of fact, what Alldorfer ultimately says is that if higher level needs are not met, your needs for esteem, achievement, self-respect, self-actualization, it somehow makes lower level ones more salient, and you start to focus on the deficiency types of needs. If you're continually frustrated at one level, it changes your focus to another level. It's an interesting implication there for management, because it is easy for management to deal with the maintenance needs, the deficiency needs. It may be more difficult from the perspective of management to deal with the growth needs. It means you have to trust people. You have to be willing to give them opportunities to perform and to fail. That may be more difficult from a management perspective, because when you give somebody an opportunity to do something challenging and you know that they might fail, you're afraid that somehow it will reflect back on you as a manager. But unless you give that opportunity, neither you nor the employee will know. So that becomes important. If we take a look, existence needs are quite similar to Maslow's physiological and safety needs. The relatedness needs are similar to Maslow's belongingness needs, and the aspects of esteem that dealt with getting feedback from other people, the social aspects of esteem. And finally, growth needs are more with the other aspects of esteem and self-actualization, development. And now, yet another theory, McClellan's need theory. McClellan particularly looked at notions of acquired needs, needs that we learned through our experiences with the environment, and particularly studied 3 needs. Need for achievement is one, and we'll go through that. Need for affiliation, and need for power. Most of his focus has been a need for achievement. So what is this need for achievement? Well, it's a desire to be successful. And need for achievement has been looked at in relation to grades that people get, and in relation to success in the workplace, and over and above ability, it does predict performance. So now we see an aspect of motivation that does relate to performance. People who are high on need for achievement are going to perform better than those with comparable abilities, but who don't seem to show the same drive for success. And what is it about achievement that helps people to be successful? Well, first of all, people who have high needs for achievement have a preference for situations in which they can feel personally responsible for the outcomes. Should remind you of something about locus of control. There is a real similarity between these 2 characteristics. You can't experience success unless you're willing to take responsibility for outcomes. It also says something about intrinsic aspects of motivation versus extrinsic aspects of motivation. So people want to be in situations where they have responsibility if they have high need for achievement. And if they're not in these situations, you're going to have unhappy campers. A second aspect of all of this is a preference for moderately difficult tasks. Interesting. Need for success and only moderately difficult? Well, why only moderately difficult? Why wouldn't they go out for the toughest tasks that are out there? Yeah, Kelly.
They don't want to set themselves up for failure.
Exactly. So what they're doing is they're assessing what the chances are for success in all of this. And if the chances for success are really minimal, the task is so difficult they're not going to achieve success, then they don't satisfy their need for achievement. Well, why don't they opt for the other side of things where it's really easy and they know they can always achieve success? Can anybody conjure up why that might not be satisfying? Yeah, Emma?
Because if it's too easy, they won't be able to show their ability to work at a higher level and be able to step up maybe beyond what they think that they can do and show management that they can do something good.
Exactly. So if the task is so easy that anybody could do it, you don't get any real feelings for success anyway. It's not tapping into your ability levels at all. So there is an assessment of what the risk is in doing things, and there is more of a propensity to take things that are in that moderately difficult range because that leaves people feeling with greatest chances of succeeding and thereby experiencing those desires of that goal of achieving. And finally, these people desire performance feedback. Very important to get feedback. Feedback does 2 things for people who are high need achievers. First, feedback directly gives you evidence of succeeding in those tasks where you rely on feedback, or even if you get feedback directly from the task itself. In the absence of feedback, you can't know whether you succeeded or not. So you need feedback either direct from the task or from other people. And the other thing that feedback does for people who are high in need for achievement is it allows them to correct their actions so that where they're missing the target, they can come back and change their behaviors and achieve the success that they so desire. So two important things on people who are high for need for achievement. How do you get high need for achievement? You acquire it over a course of a lifetime in terms of being rewarded for mastering tasks. Parents at first are important in encouraging this mastery type of behavior in children, in rewarding them for achieving. And then the more you achieve, the more you want to achieve. And so you look for it in other places as well. The two other needs that McClellan studied are the need for affiliation and the need for power. Need for affiliation is going to sound like relatedness needs or belonging needs. Talks about people who have a strong desire to be in social situations where they can communicate with other people. People who are strong on need for affiliation learn social networks really well and really enjoy communication. There are people who like to be on committees, who like to be on teams. Given preference, will engage in face-to-face types of communication in the absence of face-to-face telephone communication, but really get gratification by being in touch with other people. These kinds of people should be in social situations in the workplace where they can communicate with others. These types of people are not going to be good candidates for full-time telecommuters or for jobs where they have to work in isolation from other people. And finally, need for power. Very complex need, because it can be satisfied either in terms of personal power and people achieving things for themselves, or it can be satisfied in terms of achieving through others and for the organization, which is where you'd want to see need for power. People who have a high need for power are people who are going to need to influence other people. They're not happy unless they're somehow in the center and they're able to manage others and sometimes manipulate others. When they're in social situations, particularly small groups, they're going to seek to get attention so that others out there will notice them and begin to attribute to them some of the power that they so crave. Not a bad characteristic for somebody who wants to be a manager, because people who choose to be managers are going to be people who will need to get other people to do things, to influence other people. If your choice is to become a manager and you don't want to influence other people, it's going to be tough to manage, okay? Even project management involves managing other people, not just events. So you need to have this. So actually, if we look at all three of McClellan's needs, they're all three needs that would do anybody in a managerial position well. Achievement, wanting to succeed. Affiliation, wanting to be with other people. And power. Three things that feed in. And finally, along the needs, there's one more, not exactly a need, but something that is getting more and more attention. Self-efficacy. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about social learning, but I want to focus on it right now exclusively. Self-efficacy is a belief that we have concerning our ability to perform a task. It is quite similar to our sense of confidence. If we don't have confidence in ourselves, then we're going to have difficulty performing a task. We're not even going to choose opportunities to perform a task. We'll shy away from opportunities if we think we can't do something. On the other hand, where we feel pretty confident about ourselves, we're willing to volunteer and go out and do things. And it's tough to immerse ourselves in situations, particularly in the workplace, where we haven't had experience. There's a tendency to shy away from those things and maybe not even attempt certain types of careers because we think we haven't ever done that before. We've done it a little bit. Maybe we're not very good at it. Self-efficacy develops, our sense of it, basically two ways. Either through direct experience, we've done something and we see that we can succeed, or through vicarious experience, watching other people and saying, oh, I could do that. Or watching other people and saying, boy, is that complicated. You know, you watch those people during the Olympics on the gymnastic bars. I don't know how they do it. Nor would I even try at doing something like that. And as it develops, in the very early stages, we tend to focus on the situation that contributes to our succeeding or not succeeding. Not only our ability, but we focus on things like, well, is this a really difficult task or is it not a difficult task? Do I have the resources for doing this? Are people giving me the right tools for doing something in the early stages of learning it? Am I coming in at, like peak of performance, or was it really a bad time? And so in the initial stages of trying to gain skills in any area, we are quite aware of external conditions that contribute to our ability to do something. But something interesting happens in the way of gaining experience with a situation. After a while, we forget about those external situations and we tend to focus almost exclusively on what we think is our ability or lack of ability. Well, this can become a problem because in situations where people judge that they don't have ability and they really need ability in that area to succeed in the career or to move upward, how are you ever going to get them to try? One of the areas that we hear about where people say, I can't do it, talk about, well, actually two areas. I can't deal with numbers. My mind goes to mush when I have to deal with numbers. More frequently heard among females than males, but heard among males as well. And I can't do public speaking. I could never do public speaking. I turn into a little puddle up there when I have to do public speaking. So here are people who are making judgments about lack of self-efficacy. And what is it going to mean in terms of motivation in the workplace, and opportunities that they will choose for themselves, and opportunities that they'll shy away from, and careers that they'll choose and shy away from. Suggests that people will rule out for themselves certain areas without ever really fully coming to grips with trying something. Lots of people whose ability may even appear to be lower than yours, if you judge yourself to have fear of numbers, numerophobia or something like that, come to grips with dealing with spreadsheets and databases and things like that at the workplace. Given the right teaching, you could master it. You could get there. But if you rule it out for yourself, if self-efficacy is seen as being low in this, you're not going to try. Same thing goes with public speaking. There are courses out there to help you cope with the situation. And the negative, the downside of the self-efficacy really has to do where people rule themselves out, judge their efficacy level to be non-existent, see it as being, I don't have the ability. Oh, now we come back to where we started early on in this talk, ability and effort. Is it ability, performance? Is it effort? Can you go back and turn it up a notch? Can you try harder? Can you look for a different way to learn something? Maybe your initial attempts at trying to learn something were not well done. The person who was trying to teach you something was not a good teacher, was not so well prepared. The resources that you were given initially were not the best resources. Can you go back and think about giving it a second try? This has this internal, external ability, effort. It has really important ramifications in the workplace. But let me sort it out by talking about a little research study done by someone named Harold Stevenson, done with students, and did cross-cultural comparisons between Asian countries and students in the US, and looked at parents and teachers' judgments of their children's reading and math ability, and the effort that they were putting in. Interestingly, in the US, both parents and teachers, particularly when it came to math, but also somewhat in reading, were much more likely to put emphasis on ability in terms of performance. Well, this is the reading score, this is what they're doing in class. They have the ability, they don't have the ability. In Asia, not so. Parents were much more likely to put emphasis on something which can be moderated and can be changed. It's called effort. You're not performing well, you're not putting in enough time doing your homework, you're not putting enough time in going to the library, work harder. Very interesting implications as we spell this out in the workplace. Because the manager who is more likely to attribute somebody's performance to ability level is going to let those who are performing at a lower level get off the hook. That's the best you can do. Okay? You're never going to go anywhere in this organization. You could be a good person at this level. Same would hold for the classroom. But those who are likely to attribute it to effort, performance, one of the things in our motivation equation says, yeah, ability does play a role in it. We're not going to deny it. But we think that you're more able and more capable than you think you are. And you can draw from that reservoir of ability and maybe even raise the reservoir of ability that you have by putting in more effort. Go back, practice harder, and practice harder. Your performance still isn't at the level you want. You're not practicing as hard as you think you are. Go back and practice harder. Do it again, and do it again. And find different ways of practicing. Maybe you're not practicing in an efficient way. Go back and work harder at what you're doing. What this says from somebody who's trying to spur better performance out of workers is you don't settle for a lower level of performance. You're going to always be out there ratcheting up the performance of people. I can think of no better real-life example than one of the New York area football teams. The team is essentially the same in terms of personnel this year as it was last year. The difference is the coach. The coach has changed. And suddenly, this is a team that doesn't quit in the third and fourth quarters, but is willing to come back. And this is a team that works on conditioning in the off-season so that they have endurance when the season comes around. And this is a team that persists. Did something change in their ability level from one year to the next? I think not. Okay, already the team has won more games, 4, okay, than they've won in how many years? Well, certainly the past 2 years, okay? A different approach to motivation. So what does all of this mean than for the workplace. If we look at just dealing with needs, it means, as if we go back over everything, as managers, you have to appreciate diversity. And in this case, I'm talking about diverse motivations. To understand that people are complex, that they work for multiple motives, and some of those motives are going to be more important to some people than other people. As managers, you're going to have to find out what pushes the buttons. You need to become astute at evaluating the motives of your personnel and figuring out how you can offer incentives to spur on performance. It also means that you're going to have to provide satisfaction for those extrinsic motives. Where the work situation is so bad that it's unhealthy, where pay is so poor that it doesn't cover some basic needs, where security is so bad that people worry about being secure in the workplace, you've got to go in and fix those things so that you can get performance out of your workers and they're not coming in and worrying, somebody going to come in and mug me in the workplace. Is this work situation one where I have to be afraid of working in some kind of toxic situation, fumes, whatever? And finally, you need to appreciate intrinsic motivation. Go back to where we started, or somewhere along the line. We said it's easy for managers to deal with the deficiency motives. You can always raise pay. In fact, you can always fix working conditions. You can make it a more secure workplace, and you can give people the company picnic. But giving people opportunities for growth, giving people opportunities to achieve, trusting in people to show their best, giving them the resources to do that, that's the harder part of management. And you need to be able to do that. And so, we've come from a starting point where we looked at what motivation is and what needs are. And we can look forward to, next time, continuing with this complex area of motivation and dealing with it from not a need base, but a cognitive base.